When Joshua was 8 days old, Nikki and Braden went to a chapel not far from the woods and railroad where he had been born during the night. They went to baptize him, to dedicate his life to God's service, claim God's grace on him, and assume their commitment to rear him as a child of God. The priest was more than willing to carry out this rite of initiation and inclusion. They knew it was customary to pay a priest for such a blessing, but he graciously accepted the pittance that Braden had to offer. He took Joshua in his arms and claimed God's grace on him, as well as over the family charged with his nurture. He baptized him and returned him to his parents, proclaiming this child would be so much more than anyone expected. Through him, God's grace would be made plain for all to see. Before Nikki could get much out of her mouth, however, an elderly man of the congregation came up to speak to them. His name was Samuel, and he had long served God in that chapel as caretaker, janitor, and sexton. He had been looking for God's redemption to come to the nation, bringing a revival that would transform hearts, minds, and even the social order around them. The breath of God was upon him, and he had a few things to say about this infant child in Nikki's arms. He asked the privilege of holding Joshua and prayed, "O Lord, allow this your servant to now depart in peace. For I have seen with my own eyes the one on whom your work of redemption will come about. You have prepared a light for the people from ages past, and now that light is come into our midst. In this child will your light shine as a call to redemption, wholeness, and reconciliation for all." While Braden and Nikki were dumbstruck with the proclamation in this prayer, Samuel blessed them, saying, "Many will stumble greatly on account of this little one, while many others cast to the margins will be lifted up to their rightful place. Great contradictions will be exposed in his life, and the thoughts and intentions of many will be brought to light in their violent response to him." As Braden took Joshua back from Samuel, a prophetess by the name of Hannah, who hardly ever left the chapel in her old age, came up to them. She had lived a long life, now having survived her husband for several years, spending her time mostly in prayer, fasting, and works of mercy. Hannah gave thanks to God for this little one in Braden's arms. She began telling people that in this little one was God's greatest gift for all of humanity. The long-awaited redemption of God, for which so many were desperate, would not come to fulfillment now, in and through him. Amid the wonder of all that had happened over their short stay in and near Chickasaw, Nikki and Braden determined to return to Saturn to seek better conditions from which they had departed, and which they had found in their current setting. Filled with wonder, amazement, and consternation from all the words ringing in their ears, they began their slow trip back home, where Joshua might grow up. They reflected long and hard on what they had experienced and heard, but it was a lot to process. And there was an awful lot to do in the caring for this new life under their care. Back in Saturn, they set up finding a home for themselves, worked for Braden, and building a sense of security around Joshua. Nikki nursed him, weaned him, taught him to walk and feed himself. He grew, developing alongside the other children of his age. He moved from infant to toddler to preschooler through kindergarten and elementary school. Along the way, grace was a notable part of his life, and he grew in respect from peers and adults surrounding him. He grew in the ways of God and shared those ways in all of his relationships. He was in most ways a normal kid. But he was well loved and exuded love for all people in his circles. Now, every year, Joshua's parents went to Jasper for the Wild Goose Spring Festival. In due course, when Joshua was 12 years old, they went to the festival again, camping out as usual with pilgrim friends. At the end of the festival, having listened to various speakers and entertainers, they began their journey home with their collection of friends, neighbors, and their families. As Joshua was wont to hang out freely with his friends, they did not notice his absence until they ended the first day's hike back toward Saturn. They called out for him and began searching earnestly for him among his friends and their families. When he did not show up, and they recognized that no one had seen him on that day's journey, Nikki and Braden scrambled back to Jasper in search of him. They retraced their steps to Jasper, seeking for him along the trail, all the while concerned he had never started home with them. Night overtook them before they could make their way back. And they were forced to worry through the night and into the next morning as they continued their anxious trek to find their missing son. Arriving at the festival grounds, they searched high and low for him, contacting park rangers and asking person after person if they might have seen him. It was only when they found a group of lecturers who had stayed on debriefing the events, breakout sessions, and crafting plans for next year's festival that they found Joshua at last. As much as everyone would expect the parents of a middle schooler gone missing to be anxious with worry, Joshua seemed to share none of their concern. Rather than displaying the least bit of worry or concern, Joshua was simply participating actively in the discussions, taking in what others were saying, making good points, and asking good questions about the issues at hand. Other than looking at him, he appeared as simply one more of the workshop leaders or keynote speakers gathered. Nikki's anxiety and worry conflicted with the scene before them, taking her aback just as much as Braden. They came up to him to take him in their arms in relief. Meanwhile, the rest of those gathered expressed how they had been impressed and astounded at the insight and contributions of one so young. Joshua might have simply been Nikki and Braden's child at home. But here he was looked at with different eyes and noticed as being far out of the ordinary. His understanding was not simply beyond his years. It was also beyond that of many adults they had encountered. Nikki and Braden pulled Joshua out of the discussion circle and drew him aside. They were happy enough that he was safe, but still concerned their separation had ever happened at all. Getting over their initial relief at finding him and their shock at his being so composed and in his element. They asked why he had abandoned the company returning home and why he had not considered the angst that he had caused them with his disappearing act. They could even have been brought up on charges of child neglect for misplacing their son, a minor. They had both been out of their minds looking for him. Joshua's response was perhaps even more unexpected. Beyond so much they had experienced on finding him. Why were you even looking for me? How didn't you realize this is where I would be, where I should be, discussing the things of my Father? How would you not understand this is where I belong, my most natural environment, the only place for me to be? Could you not see I am home right here in this place, in this very setting? Nikki didn't know what to do with all of this as Joshua continued to grow, learn, and deepen in wisdom. Would you?